Hello and welcome. I'm John Minnick, Special Projects Manager at Reagan Communications and PR Daily. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to How to Measure Sentiment Through Voice of the Employee Data in partnership with Polite Mail. Before we get started with our program, some housekeeping notes. If you run into any technical issues, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your window for assistance. Additionally, please use the Q&A function to ask our speakers any questions today. Again, it's the chat function for technical issues and the Q&A function for speaker questions. There will be plenty of time throughout and at the end of today's session for questions. Within 24 to 48 hours, you will receive a survey. Once you have completed that survey, you will have access to all of the slides and bonus materials from today's session. So be on the lookout for that survey. Now, let's get started. Engaged and happy employees are the lifeblood of a successful organization, so it's critical to solicit their feedback throughout the year actively. Gathering that feedback should be utilized and presented in a way that improves employees' experience without feeling intrusive or oppressive. Today, I'm joined by Polite Mail's Paul Stewart and Mike McNeely, who will explain why voice of the employee data is crucial for grasping employee engagement and satisfaction, serving as a direct conduit to the organizational core by capturing thoughts and experiences. Learn why integrating diverse measurement methods enhances the accuracy and holistic perspective of employee sentiment. And now I'm happy to turn things over to the Polite Mail team.
All right. Thanks, John. Let me share my screen and away we'll go here. Well, thanks, John. So first, I think we need to talk about what is voice of the employee. So we're going to just take a minute to make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. So voice of the employee, or VOE, as you can see here, we've got it defined as a systematic process designed to uncover and assess employee concerns or problems that impact the total employer-employee relationship. It's a way for employees to honestly air their needs, wishes, hopes, and preferences without facing any negative consequences, in the workplace. And the aim is to act upon the findings, right? Not just collect data and check a box, but to act upon these findings to improve work relationships, business processes, and the organization as a whole. And it really needs to become a cultural value. So not a one-time thing or every 3 or 5 year type of thing. But what's critical is to have it be ongoing and really just part of the culture, kind of like in a continuous improvement cycle type of approach. So it is it's beyond just sentiment, right? I mean, you're naturally going to capture a lot of sentiment as part of the components of an overall voice of the employee program. And a lot of the technology that we see now for gathering VOE data was born out of the pandemic, when everyone or many people started working from home. Employers, really were pretty blind to how engaged employees were. So a lot of things sprang up, and they've had some time to mature, and there's some great tools out there for that. And it really needs to be holistic, not just a single single data source, or kind of single channel. You want it to be looking at different viewpoints for all employees. And it just quickly, using at the bottom, you should have a react button, and there's kind of a clap or applause. How many of our attendees today are involved with any sort of a voice of the employee measurement program? Oh, quite a few. Nice. Oh, we got some. Wow.
Very nice. Very nice.
That's great to hear, because we were a little curious. We weren't clear on the breakdown between HR and comms, and to what extent at different, obviously it varies, but at different organizations, how much they're working together, how much this is really owned by HR, but maybe they're having communications gather the information, et cetera. So that's great to see. All right. So the value of this, it's extremely valuable, right? So we've got a few data points here. Nearly a quarter of all workers place having my voice heard above training as something they most want, right? Everyone wants to be heard. So gathering this type of data is critical to having happier employees, which, as we all know, is critical to overall success. Only 10% of employees strongly agree that their voice is heard, and then 88% of employees whose companies financially outperform others in their industry feel heard. So, this is some serious, pretty compelling data here in favor of, this type of program. And there's also, as most of you, I'm sure, know, value to you as, comms or HR practitioners, because this is such critical information that this is giving you more of a seat at the table as a strategic advisor, because this does have such strategic value, and it's so critical to success. So it's a good place to be when you're gathering this type of information and processing it. So benefits of measuring, solves problems before they worsen, helps prioritize investments and initiatives, right? It helps you get a handle on what might be lacking, optimizes work distribution, improves structures, policies, and support mechanisms, measures impacts of different initiatives, identifies training needs, which kind of goes right along with the one next to it, prioritizing investments and initiatives, identifies burnout risk, and, of course, gives employees a voice. And certain types of measurement are more geared toward productivity, looking at like this one optimizes work distribution. So I'm sure some of you have come across, or maybe your organizations are even using tools that are looking at productivity, which is a bit controversial, right? Because you start to get into this kind of big brother area, whereas most people think of this voice of the employee as more of a positive thing, where you're giving employees a voice, letting them be heard, what could make things better, versus monitoring to see, if people are spending too much time on, non-work things or that type of thing. So some organizations feel that that is important. So, that's obviously a big consideration in all of this. To what extent, if at all, do you engage in that type of measurement? And then sentiment analysis, of course, can be really beneficial to the first point, for example, solving problems before they worsen, and the burnout risk. If you are using sentiment as part of some of your measurement or monitoring or things like that, you can identify maybe in some industries potential safety concerns. And then also maybe a toxic manager or just a general toxic environment, things like that, when you're able to see the tone of conversations between employees on different channels and things like that. And that can certainly be done, obviously, without naming names. It can still be anonymous. But the risks and to consider, you never want to measure anything without having a clear goal, of course. Surveys, they absolutely have their place, but they often fail to solicit meaningful responses just because of the nature of how they work, and you don't want to ask too much of people's time. Of course, there's survey fatigue. We see this, at our workplaces sometimes, and also in our personal lives, right? You order something, or you get off the phone with customer service somewhere, and they ask you to do a survey, and you think it's going to be quick, and then it says, this will take 7 minutes to complete. And no thanks, so you've got to do it in small doses. There's sometimes not a good opportunity to ask follow-up questions, which can be really, really important. Employees sometimes conceal the truth because even if you're assuring them that's anonymous, some of them just still don't fully trust that. And then sometimes, depending on what you're doing, they can feel that they're being overly monitored, which causes trust issues. Gartner had a survey in 2022 where employees, the two top most acceptable reasons for monitoring them were raising awareness about career development opportunities and providing help in finding information to do their jobs. So, that would tell us that, employees within reason are open to some monitoring, but, if it's for the right reasons and it's going to help them do certain things. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, and he's going to talk through some specific ways that you can gather this type of information. So over to you, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. And again, if you have any questions, please drop them down in our Q&A and we can get those answered for you. I do see a couple hands up. So just if you have questions, make sure you're dropping those in the Q&A. But yes, thank you, Mike. Mike has been talking about the voice of the employee and what it is and whatnot. But how can we gather the voice of the employee beyond surveys? There are many different ways to be able to gather. And hopefully over the next few slides, you'll be able to take away some of those ways to gather some of that data. So the first one I want to talk about is basically digital EX. And you want to analyze your employee's digital footprint. Mike has mentioned a few times that this is in no way supposed to be a micromanagement kind of tool or way of doing things, but being able to digitally get their digital footprints or digital EX data, it can provide insights into how the employee engages into their digital work environment. It's going to give you insights on the activity volume over time for individuals or teams, give you a point in time activity volume compared to other team members. It's going to also show you the adoption rate with the initiatives. Are people taken to what you put into place, or are they just not taken to that? You're going to notice some drop-off rates and see what those drop-off rates are. You're going to see if people are spending time on meaningful work, or are they just kind of just going through the day. It's really going to also help you show you how much time is spent on the activities that they're doing from a day-to-day. But again, this is in no way supposed to be micromanaging. It's more to kind of get you guys to see what your employee is doing from day to day to help them succeed. Another great way to gather the voice of the employee is really focus groups and talking to managers in one-on-ones. We have found that a great way to accomplish this, like I mentioned, are one-on-ones with team members. It helps managers gain a solid pulse on the engagement of their team. This happens by manager-led one-on-ones with your team members. You can also create focus groups really to help identify issues and get feedback to how to solve those problems. Focus groups tend to take less time than one-on-ones with every employee. And according to research from Quantum Workforce, employees who report follow-up after those focus groups tend to be about 12 times more engaged than employees that do not do follow-up after those focus groups. Another way we found that you could collect some of the voice of the employee and get that information is feedback platforms. Platforms like TinyPulse and Office Vibe, they provide real-time comments, concerns, and suggestions. These platforms, the beauty of these platforms are they can be anonymous, which Mike has talked about, the anonymity of how employees want to provide information. It allows for constant encouragement of honesty and openness. You could gamify it. You can make it if whoever provides more feedback can. Well, if you provide feedback, you can give peer recognition and trending feedback topics make platforms really engaging and user-friendly. And the platforms are really a good way to use for larger organizations that have a harder time with one-on-ones. We found that larger organizations have a hard time doing one-on-ones with every employee. So using these platforms will give you a really good opportunity to kind of tap into the employee and get that feedback from them.
Yeah, and the other tough thing about one-on-ones, while they're extremely valuable, is rolling all that all that information up in a consistent way to whoever's managing this VOE program, right? Because you'd have to have a standardized way and you know, some kind of a rubric almost, because just having lots of free-form notes, you know, for thousands of employees is can be pretty difficult to work with.
Yes, absolutely. So we all know what Slack, Microsoft Teams are, Zoom, which we're on right now. They're primarily used for communication purposes, but there are a lot of benefit of voice of employee data waiting to really be tapped in. That we found that paired with a sentiment analysis product, the content of the messages can offer insights into things such as employee morale, satisfaction, and potential areas of conflict and concern. Polite Mail is actually coming out with a product that we call Comlytics that we're pairing with Microsoft Teams, and it's going to be a sentiment analysis tool that lies within Teams that's going to allow you to measure sentiment amongst Microsoft Teams channels. That is coming out in 2024, so more information on that to come out. But we have found that using these collaboration tools, they will give you some great insight on negative and even positive sentiment amongst those channels. Do you ever watch how your employees interact with each other, whether it's digitally or in person? Everyone has a different way of working nowadays in this post-pandemic way of life, and watching how your employees interact with other employees, as I said, digitally and in person, can really show you how those employees feel about the company and really their morale. This is a great indication of their overall engagement at work. We have found that when employees are more engaged with each other, they tend to be more engaged in their work. So really monitoring that employee-employee interactions is a really great way to see how that employee, how much that employee is engaged. And finally, there are some other voice of the employee data collection methods besides surveys that we have found to be beneficial. Some being thematic surveys, digital listening and processing tools such as AI and language processing technology, nudge tech data, this nudge tech data allows you to set up reminders, if you will, like take a break here or step away from your computer there. Seeing what kind of data is set up there is a good way to collect that method. And employee advocacy boards. We have found that if you have an employee advocacy board outside of your management, that's a really good way to have someone bring forth concerns and questions that other employees might have that they just don't feel comfortable coming into your management team with. So besides everything that I've talked about here, I want to ask everyone, if you want to drop it in the chat, what kind of methods do you use other than surveys to be able to collect some of the voice of the employee? So feel free to drop that in the chat. We'd like to hear what you're using. And it's good to have that information for other customers as well. Mike, if you want to go to the next slide. Yep. Perfect. No worries. So we talked about collecting information beyond surveys, but don't count out those surveys. Rather, improve them. Try switching from an annual survey to more frequent, shorter pulse surveys. You want to try to avoid satisfaction questions, such as, are you satisfied working here? You'd rather use stuff like, are you satisfied with the frequency of the feedback from your manager? We have found that sending surveys more frequently, maybe once a quarter or twice a quarter, you're going to get more feedback rather than that annual survey, because people are more likely to tell you how they feel in the moment. Prepare your survey for maximum effectiveness. You want to collect and benchmark data on the current state of your workforce. You want to set a goal with what you get from that data. So when you get that data, what goal are you trying to accomplish with the data that you've collected? Determine how often you want to send those surveys, as I mentioned, whether it's quarterly, monthly, every other week. Just try to figure out when you want to send those surveys. Find out which channels your employees utilize the most to deliver the survey. Are your employees using Slack more than Microsoft Teams, or are you using SharePoint? Find whatever is gonna be able to get that survey out more to more of your employees to get them engaged. On the flip side, don't be afraid to use multiple channels. So if you have a Slack and a SharePoint and it's pretty well diverse with employees going to both, use both just to get more responses from the survey, and really be prepared to apply the feedback and communicate changes to employees. Openness and open communication is huge with employees from management. If the management is communicating openly, then your employees are going to be more engaged moving forward. So at this point, I'm going to pass this on back over to Mike to talk about collecting and acting on the data.
All right, thank you, Paul. So yeah, now we're going to look at some questions that can help guide you as you assemble an effective measurement strategy for VOE. So because you've registered for this webinar, you're going to be receiving a report that Gartner has put together on VOE. And then they have identified, as you can see here, some key questions. And these apply to any measurement you're going to do for anything, not just voice of the employee. But of course, you know, why measure, right? Why are we doing this? Which question are we trying to answer? You know, with what data? What calculation methods? Who's going to see it? What decisions are you trying to make with this information? And what's the impact on employees? So, you know, this is a nice set of kind of guiding principles or questions as you embark on this type of program, or, you know, as you maybe make changes to your existing program. So we're going to walk through a little scenario here using these questions to see if, based on the answers, if we should proceed or not proceed. So this one, it's saying, you know, why measure? To see whether people are working, especially those that are underperforming, or simply to see when people are conducting which work activities. What's the question you're trying to answer? How many hours per day are employees productive? With what data? From monitoring all activities on the primary device. So agent-based data collection is implemented across all applications, regardless of whether they're employed for professional or personal use. So something is going on everybody's computer. What's the calculation method? Average time spent per week on predefined categories of activities. Some are deemed productive, others unproductive. Who's supposed to see it? Only HR under exceptional circumstances. To make what decision? To support a performance improvement plan or justify firing an employee. With what impact? Perception of low management trust, toxic environment, and fear of being seen as unproductive. Employees may increase their activity levels just to be seen as busy, even when doing so does not help them perform their tasks more effectively. So I think this is probably pretty clear, but based on all of that, do not proceed, right? This is very heavy-handed in terms of, you know, sort of big brother approach. I would say the potential negatives far outweigh what you might gain, especially if this is only, you know, you're applying this to all of your employees, even though it only be used on a very small number of them. So this one, probably pretty obvious, but good exercise here to walk through. Or, you know, maybe if someone in leadership was asking you to employ something like this, you could kind of run through this and go back to them and say, well, you know, not sure if it's really worth it. There might be better ways. Generally, for people who are, you know, underperforming, you could work directly with their managers on something like this instead of trying to put something in place for the whole company. All right, we'll do one more. So this one, Why do you measure? To find friction, low employee sentiment, poor employee experience, or decreased team productivity levels. Determine whether these negative outcomes are linked to tools that were put in place to support new ways of working, enterprise-wide hybrid work policies, dictating which days should be office-based, and possibly other factors. So what's the question? Are we providing a supportive environment that helps employees do their best work? With what data? Collaboration data, survey data to collect sentiment, and location data on where employees are working. Frequently, analysts combine the data with the data collected from tools installed on workers' primary devices. So the calculation would be correlations, trends, interpersonal and inter-team variation. So, to compare different teams and things. For who to see, head of employee experience, executives and digital workplace leaders, along with HR, to make what decision? To support prioritization of investments and policies that aim to help improve the overall experience, productivity, and well-being. With what impact on employees? They perceive an opportunity to contribute to improvements and provide input and feel that their employer aims to improve their experience. So, conclusion, proceed, but with caution, and continue to measure employee sentiment as it relates to the ongoing collection of data. So I think we've already touched on this, but for this, of course, the key is ongoing, and as you go along, evaluate each thing you do and make tweaks as needed. But I think, the real key here is to answer what question, and then to make, with what impact on employees. This is for the right reasons. So if we think of voice of the employee as measuring, down this left column here, the things we're trying to gauge are employee productivity, employee experience, and employee well-being. Gartner has identified 4 different sort of actions to take when determining what to do with the data. So they recommend these: discover, prioritize, act, and evaluate. So discover is kind of, what do we have here? What's our data? What have we learned? Prioritize it, of course. Okay, you can't do everything all at once. So what needs the most attention? Act, what are you going to do with this? And again, you'll be getting all this information. And then evaluate as you go. Each time you go through this, see what you can learn. And of course, keep sharing with employees any changes you've made based on these, different collection methods, so that you have their buy-in that, okay, we're doing all this, but we're getting something out of it. So Paul is going to walk you through a little more detail on these 4 steps along the top here. All right.
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mike. And we did have the question in the chat. Is how do you measure non-desk employees, aka frontline and workers? And we found that a few things that you could do. One of them is really to prioritize the feedback in one-on-ones with them. Another way, most frontline workers or non-desk employees, they tend to have workforce management software. So you certainly could utilize that value of that technology in terms of enabling PTO requests and allowing them maybe a section that allows them to provide feedback in that and whatnot. And really acknowledge and celebrate their work. That's really the simplest answer. They non-desk employees sometimes can feel out of the loop because they're not behind a computer all day long or whatnot, and really just acknowledge them and value the presence and the contribution to the organization. So they just people don't want to feel interchangeable. So really 53% of the employees report wanting recognition. So definitely acknowledge and celebrate their work. So I just wanted to answer that real quickly while we were on that. So, but
Paul,
yes.
One other thing, again, I think this all kind of, a lot of it has come out of COVID, but there are some really great apps now that non-desk workers, that, you know, companies can get for their non-desk workers, that makes it really easy for them, you know, to collect feedback, you know, in whatever form. But there's a lot of great apps now that people can have. Pretty much everybody's got a phone, so you know, you want to make it really easy, you know, so at the end of someone's day, they don't have to go home and log on to something. You know, they can just do it. They're on their phone a lot anyway, so there's some fantastic apps out there now.
Absolutely. Great question. Thank you for that. So coming back to essentially the employee experience roadmap here, we do have found 4 ways to help fill that out. Those ways are really the discover, prioritize, act, and evaluate. And over the next 4 slides, I hopefully can give you kind of an idea of how each one of those, how you can partake and make each one of those actionable. So really discover, you want to discover and assess previously unknown problem areas that can be addressed. Now, determine how many people are impacted. Is it just a small group that's impacted, or is this company-wide? So you need to determine how many people are actually impacted by this. Decide whether the issue is leading to a high level or high degree of negative sentiment or emotion, or if it's just a symptom of it. So you need to kind of figure that out as well. Perform a gap analysis to discover the reasons for the gap and how the organization can overcome it, and segment and analyze employee data holistically. We have found that if you segment and analyze employee voice data, you really will find some awesome, amazing things. For example, Bank of America, they found out that hiring people individually was far less effective than hiring people in cohorts. There was a large retailer that out there that found women of color were far less comfortable with managerial practices than other intersectional groups. And a large restaurant chain that is in Canada found out that their servers staff were spending too much time on their drive-through service, and they needed to redesign their cafes. And they found that all through by segmenting and analyzing the employee data holistically. Next, you want to prioritize that data. Prioritize the investments as supported by that data. You want to use stakeholder maps to identify key stakeholders and how to manage them. Who's going to be involved in setting forward this project, and how are we going to manage them? Project what value those impacted by the planned interventions will perceive. What kind of value are you going to get out of this? Develop specific goals on how you want to measure the success of your actions. So you always want to have a goal on how you're going to measure the interventions that you put into place. You want to make sure that you're trying to achieve those goals. So you want to make sure you do have goals. And we found that low impact, high interventions are really the highest priorities. So if you can figure out what has the lowest impact but is going to have the or lowest effort but have the highest impact, you want to prioritize those first rather than the latter. Then act. You want to act based on the insights. We found the opportunity to learn from employees are everywhere, and not only do different groups have different needs, they often bring suggestions that you don't consider. So act on the insights, policy decisions, automated features and applications, reallocation of resources, and correcting the anomalies impacted experience, productivity, and well-being. Again, goals should align with the company's values and long-term objectives. And then you want to evaluate the impact of the interventions that have been prioritized and impacted. And compare that to the benchmark data. Was this new initiative expected to be valuable? Were they valuable? Were they not valuable? You need to kind of figure out if they were valuable, and if they were, keep it going. If they weren't, try to go back and see what can change. Did the behaviors change as anticipated? Did people accept this new initiative? Did the negative sentiment turn to more of a positive sentiment? And did employees feel more positive about the new ways of doing things? This is one great way of being able to kind of look at whole and seeing how that new initiative might change the landscape of your employee engagement. And improve your data collection. Establish clearly defined goals and KPIs for data collection. I think I mentioned that 2 or 3 times already. So you want to define the goals and KPIs that you're doing for that data collection. Involve senior management in deciding which processes are critical to the company's success. I think it was mentioned earlier that employees are really the lifeblood of the company. So you really want to get their feedback and communicate those changes for a more valuable response. You want to allow time between surveys to implement, communicate, and measure the effectiveness. So if you do one survey and it comes to say this, and then you do the initiative, you want to give some time between that to see how that change has affected the overall experience for the employee. And you want to create employee experience roadmaps to analyze the journeys and use survey data to improve the processes. Every piece of data you get from employees should go into the employee experience roadmaps. We have found that companies like AstraZeneca and Schneider Electric, for example, have the employee roadmap product teams that look at the employee's journey in detail. They survey the data to improve the processes all the time. So put together product teams that are going to be able to help you succeed in the employee experience roadmap. I'm going to pass it on over to Mike to talk about some best practices more aligned with email and communicating.
Thanks, Paul. And I like that last bullet about, treating this whole voice of the employee program almost like it's a product where, we're a software company, so we always have a product roadmap. So you're just thinking, okay, where can we get to with this? What are the goals? What are we going to implement along the way? And just treating it like that. I like that a lot. Anyway, so we, because, PoliteMail is an internal email measurement platform, we have lots of data around employee engagement with internal email. And every year we do a benchmark report and come out with best practices guide based on what we learn from each year's benchmark. And actually, you'll be getting the best practices guide just for signing up for this webinar. And since email in many and even most organizations is still generally the #1 channel for disseminating important information, we thought it'd be worthwhile to share just a few of the best practices from our most recent guide. So first one, sending from a specific email address. Typically, we see internal emails coming from, corpcomms at company X or internal comms at, or, whatever it happens to be. What we see here, and you can see from this chart, is that when it actually comes from a person, whether it's your CEO or senior executive or something like that, they tend to perform better, right? It just feels a little bit more personal. So that's something to think about maybe with your internal email, your broadcast communications. Next, send to smaller, more targeted audiences. So you can see here in each of the charts below, to the far left is the audience size. So under 1,000 recipients, all the way up to over 50,000, going left to right, and looking at attention, readership, and click rate, they generally all trend down as you get to larger and larger audiences. The stacked bars are showing you, how many sends we see for those audience sizes. And it makes sense, right? If you're sending something to a smaller group, it's probably going to be something that's more relevant to them, to that group, versus all company emails that you know, a lot of people might think, you know, is this really relevant to me? So to whatever extent you can, this is great. I know it can be hard to get new distribution lists at some places, but this is an important one. And then using more words and using banners a little bit less for your internal emails. You want to think about when people are clicking into these, they're usually just pulling it up in the preview pane. So you want them to see whatever the, you know, the critical information is in the preview pane. And a lot of these messages have, you know, beautifully designed banners at the top, but some of them are really big. So it's taking up so much real estate in that preview pane that your more critical information is kind of below, it's outside of that view. They would have to scroll to see that. And, you know, you only have so much time to kind of get someone hooked in to read the whole message. So if there's, you know, some sort of call to action or just something important you want them to know, you want to make sure that that will show in the preview pane. So you can, you know, you can test this yourself before sending something out. So in some cases, you may want to either shrink or even remove those big banner images because it can really eat into your real estate for what's most important. And that's what we have here. And now we've got time
we
for
got
some
some
questions.
Q&A. Yeah, we got some questions that have come in, Mike. The first question is from anonymous attendee. Just to clarify, when you're talking about monitoring one-on-one conversations, we're not talking about eavesdropping, right? Correct. We don't want to use this as a micromanagement tool or eavesdropping tool. And Mike, feel free to interject as well. You want to kind of use this more along the lines of being able to listen to kind of what the employee is talking about.
Yeah, I don't think the intent is ever to measure one-on-one conversations. And I would think for a lot of these, the technology available, it doesn't even do that, right? You're looking at across a team or even across the whole organization to see, you know, what's the overall sentiment, you know, maybe day by day or week by week. And then, you know, across different departments to see, wow, we're seeing things really trend pretty negative on this team. What is happening there? And is there a big volume spike, et cetera, but not one-on-one. I don't see much value there, and probably more potential damage than gain.
And if you do have more questions, drop them in the Q&A. We do have another question from Shane. What ways do you evaluate culture change beyond data?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough one to get your arms around, right? To be able to kind of quantify that. I think it's one of those things where you need to come up with some of your own definitions and some kind of a scale. And also maybe goal setting, right? Like, okay, you know, we want to become a place, you know, where this happens or that happens, and just see, you know, if you're able to achieve that. I'd be curious to sort of crowdsource that one and see if people want to put in the chat anything they're doing or they're planning to do around measuring cultural change, which is, yeah, so much more broad and kind of nebulous. So maybe we'll keep an eye on that.
Absolutely. Do you have a gamification platform preference?
I don't.
I don't either.
Yeah, personally, I haven't been involved with any of the gamification, but I bet you some of our audience members do. So again, if people could throw their gamification tool of choice into the chat, I'm sure some of your fellow attendees would appreciate that.
Regarding sending from a specific email address, are you suggesting leaders send from their own? And if so, how do you handle bounce backs? I can actually take this one, Mike. Yes, we do suggest sending from a CEO. Like if you want to get a note out to the from the CEO, instead of saying that, having it go on behalf of the CEO, send from the CEO's email address, and you can use that in the from address. With Polite Mail, we have the ability to redirect all auto replies and undeliverables to a specific inbox. So if you're sending from a CEO's box, you can set it up so any auto replies, any replies, or any undeliverables will go to a specific inbox that you've set up for those. So those bounce backs and auto replies don't go to your CEO's box. In terms of outside of Polite Mail, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Outlook might have a bounce back option. I could be wrong, but you might want to look.
Outlook,
Yes.
sorry, Outlook definitely has the ability to, I think it's under options, direct replies to. So you can do that. As far as, suppressing auto replies like Polite Mail does, I don't think it's got something like that. And then also, so yeah, as Paul said, in Polite Mail, we make it pretty easy to send, so it looks like it's coming from that executive. What I know some customers do who are just using Outlook or something, if your CEO is named Paul Stewart, instead of having them send it, you create a mailbox that's like Paul J. Stewart or something like that, and you're able to send from that. So it's slightly different, but I know that's a workaround some people have done.
Awesome. Some great questions coming in. Maybe I missed it, but do you have your favorite approach to taking action post survey?
I think the biggest thing is, of course, sharing the results, even if it's not great, and you need to kind of say, well, it looks like we have some work to do in this particular area, sharing that, and then what you've done about it. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is you've taken some action to be able to go back and say, we listened, and we took this step or these steps based on your valuable feedback, just so people know their voice is being heard.
Awesome. Based on the graphs you showed, do you know why sending requests to audience smaller than 1,000 drew a significantly smaller response? If sending to smaller, more targeted audience is a better idea, why does the smallest audience not elicit the highest response rate?
Yeah, so maybe these charts were a little bit confusing, but the size or the height of those bars is showing how many emails were sent to that size audience. So that's all it's saying, is that the little, for example, the one on the left, attention by distribution size, the blue line is showing that that smallest audience had about 63%. So it had the highest attention rate. And attention is one of our proprietary metrics, but so you can see that there's a meaningful difference between those smaller audience. So the shorter bars are just showing that fewer messages are sent to those size groups, but the line is showing you what matters, that like your click rate, your average click rate on the far right, that orange line, is about 9% for the smallest groups, but it's down around 4%, a little less for the big groups. So that's what that's showing.
Perfect.
Good question.
That was a great question. There is a longer question. Blah, blah, blah. How do you recommend learning sentiments from? Okay, it's a long. I inherited a lead of global learning program where engagement has been low. We work with a vendor to deliver the content and monitor engagement. I have been able to identify 2 groups for learners who are disengaged. I can see registered and inactive in group 2 of learners who did not register themselves to join. How do you recommend learning sentiments from these groups?
I think, this, I know, the thrust of this webinars about, kind of getting away from surveys, but that's a case where I think it might be useful. Something very short and sweet to be able to get an accurate beat on that, rate this from 1 to 5. Are you, extremely happy, or, that type of thing. I think that's probably the most efficient way, aside from using some of the technology that's going to be monitoring those teams. But it doesn't sound like maybe those are teams that you could actually do that for, if I'm understanding it right. So that's a case where maybe that's your best bet.
Correct.
Happy to hear other thoughts in the chat.
Question from Rita said, you mentioned that there are good apps out there to help reach non-desk workers. Can you share the names of some of those for us to check out?
That might be something we should do, like as part of the follow-up when we're sending out the Gartner report and our best practices guide. Maybe we can look into adding some of it there. I just I need to be careful about who we recommend and don't recommend. It's a pretty simple, pretty simple to find some of them on, just with a Google search. But I'll see if we're able to maybe name a few that are, somewhat vetted in our follow-up.
Awesome. We still have a few more minutes for questions. So if you do have any more questions, please drop them in the Q&A. John has joined us again.
Yes, I have a couple of questions from that I've gotten in the back end here. First question, are people incorporating email into their voice of employee strategy? And what can a communicator learn from email metrics?
I can take that one, Paul, if you want.
Perfect.
Yes, I have to think, as far as we know, people are incorporating email into their overall VOE strategy. Again, VOE is supposed to really be holistic, so you're incorporating as much as you can. And because email, again, is, for a lot of organizations, really their #1 communications channel, it's a really good opportunity to do some measurement and gather some engagement information. Plus, some of the email tools have the ability to, get a thumbs up, to like or dislike things, or, do a simple poll or something like that. So, yeah, you can learn a lot from email, simply by, even the most basic metrics, like, your open rate and your click-through and things like that, to see what sort of engagement there is there. And then, there's a lot beyond that.
How do you measure employee sentiment for non-desk workers?
Yeah, so I did answer that a little earlier, but I mean, there are some ways that you want to go about. As I mentioned, you want to obviously acknowledge and celebrate their work, because recognition is a huge benefit for employees. People just want to be recognized for the work they're doing. You can leverage some of the digital project and workforce management software. Most companies have it, and as we mentioned, most people have phones. So using the apps that we kind of discussed, we didn't really go into detail what apps, but using apps that can be a good way of measuring. And again, one-on-ones. A lot of companies still perform one-on-ones with non-desk employees. So getting the information from the one-on-ones is always great as well.
We just had one come in from Jim. I understand the value of having emails coming from a person versus an entity. At the same time, some people view an email coming from the Office of Communications as being more official and important to read. How would you balance these two?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, ideally, if you have a way to measure those, you'd be able to have objective data, right? To see the engagement levels for one versus the other, and then maybe proceed accordingly. If you don't, or you're unable to measure which is getting more engagement, then yeah, I think it's just a message by message decision based on, I guess just kind of the nature, the content of the message, just thinking, okay, is this something people are more likely to open because it came from, this senior leader, or, if it came from the Office of Communications, are they going to feel like it's more official? So maybe more policy oriented things come from that Office of Communications, and other types of information that are maybe slightly more, not personal, but not as policy oriented, could come from people. That may be one way to start.
Looks like we have time for one last question. What are your top 3 pieces of advice for getting started with VOE?
All right. I would say, be thoughtful about it, right? You don't want to waste time on this. And obviously you might make mistakes and you learn from those and go on. But it's probably better to introduce one thing at a time slowly and figure it out as you go, rather than try and go all in up front and risk, kind of scaring people away from responding to things. Evaluate, as we've been saying, at each piece as you go, and make adjustments as needed. So can always add more over time. So that'd be one. Number 2, I think going back to those questions from Gartner, to help, sort of guide you, to answer what question, to make what decision, those types of questions at the outset, as simple as it might seem. I think if you actually kind of go through the exercise of, with other people, talking through that, writing down those answers, and go forward based on that. I'd also see if anything that you're hoping to gather is already being gathered by some other team or department, rather than, kind of reinventing the wheel. Maybe you can expand upon what someone else is doing. So maybe some of the data points you want are already out there, and it's a matter of combining them. And I'll throw in a 4th one. I would say, obviously engage IT early on if there's any new tools you're thinking of employing, just to make sure that you have their buy-in, because it would, you don't want to go way down a path with something and then only to find out that for some reason it's not approved. So get that part fleshed out early as you're putting things in place.
Well, thank you, Paul and Mike. That brings our time together today to a close. As a reminder to our audience, you will receive a survey within 24 to 48 hours. Once you respond, you will gain access to the slides and bonus materials from today's session, so be sure to take that survey. On behalf of Reagan Communications and Polite Mail, thank you for attending today's session, and have a great rest of your day.